Okay, it looks like we are live. We are live on Facebook. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our panel, Supporting Survivors with Pride. And I have some amazing, special individuals here on this panel tonight. I'm super excited and honored and privileged to have them on my panel today, discussing the LGBTQ plus community and survivors who have suffered any type of sexual violence. So my name is Patricia Patonis, and I am the Bilingual Education and Outreach Specialist at SARC, the Sexual Assault Resource Center, where we provide completely free and confidential services to all survivors of sexual assault. And we provide counseling services, we provide a 24/7 crisis hotline, as well as crime victims compensation, and many other resources and referrals that we to other local agencies as well as national resources as well. So yeah, let's go ahead and get started. We have quite a few to go over, but I do wanted to discuss a little bit about the Pride history and Pride Month and how it originated. And I do want to point out if, this does bring any type of triggering memories or flashbacks, that we will be talking about explicit content, and, sexual violence related topics. So feel free to call our 24/7 crisis hotline at 979-731-1000. Or you can email us at reachingout@sarcbv.org. And feel free, if you have any questions, any comments, feel free to type down in the chat below. Just know that it is not confidential, and it is public on social media. But yeah, let's go ahead and get started. That way I can go over the history, and I can also read the biographies of my panelists and who they are and what they do, and introduce them to the audience that is viewing us today. So thank you all once again. And yeah, let's go ahead and get it going and get it started. But yeah, Pride Month, it's celebrated across the country every June. LGBTQ plus Pride Month is a time to celebrate people of all sexual and gender identities, accepting people for who they are. Yet there is so much more to Pride Month than just parties and parades, right? So, Pride Month is a time to remember the history of LGBTQ plus activism and people, along with ways to defend and enhance their rights and access to resources. So, in this modern day and age, Pride and LGBTQ plus rights have been mainstream topics of discussion, with high profile victories like the national legalization of same-sex marriage, along with mainstream media and companies featuring LGBTQ plus stories and perspectives. And also LGBTQ plus awareness and support, is more prevalent today than at any other point in modern history. However, universal protection and acceptance are still far away in America and across the world. But I want to also revert back to June 28th, 1969, where police raided the Stonewall Inn, which was a popular LGBTQ plus bar in Greenwich Village, in New York. This was not the first time, it or other bars like it had been raided to round up gay men and trans women. However, as a massive crowd began to form around the bar, tensions reached a boiling point. So eventually, violence broke out, with crowd members clashing with police for multiple nights. The riots were witnessed by thousands and received extensive national media attention, and therefore LGBTQ plus activism and the fight for equality was going on well before the Stonewall Inn, but the riots acted as a catalyst for a new generation of activism. And unlike any other movements, Stonewall inspired the thousands who witnessed the riots, live or in the media, to continue their demands for equal rights, not letting the fight, which began at Stonewall, die out. And I also want to give a special shout out to JCFS, Chicago Response for Teens organization and website, where they provide counseling services, sexual health and relationship education, leadership, and LGBTQ plus resources, and for the information down below that I will be discussing here in a bit as well. So while the events that sparked the fight for LGBTQ plus liberation as we know it today get some attention, we often forget that the movement was led by trans women of color and Black lesbians. So the following four women of color were key leaders in advocating for LGBTQ plus rights. And these women cared for their community and fought for all LGBTQ plus people to have the freedom to live as they are. Because of transphobia and anti Blackness, these women often faced even more discrimination as they fought. So, as Pride Month comes to an end, let us not forget that the struggle continues. So, these women are heroes. Their bravery and absolute refusal to accept anything less than liberation sparked a movement that needs to be remembered who led the charge. And I want to also reiterate that all Black lives matter. So the first and foremost key focal point that I want to point out is Marsha P. Johnson. And Marsha Pay It No Mind Johnson was a Black trans woman who helped lead the LGBTQ plus movement in New York City for nearly 25 years. She was a drag performer and a sex worker who poured all of her energy into advocating for trans and homeless people slash youth, sex workers, people living with HIV and AIDS, and incarcerated people. So at age 23, Johnson was also one of the leaders of the Stonewall riots. In 1970, 1 year after the Stonewall riots, Marsha P. Johnson co-founded STAR, which stands for Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries, with fellow trans activist and friend Sylvia Rivera. STAR was a shelter for homeless transgender youth that Johnson and Rivera funded by working as sex workers at night. Johnson and Rivera were often homeless themselves, so they wanted to create a safe space for trans youth to sleep at night. STAR was revolutionary on a number of levels. You know, STAR was the first LGBTQ plus youth shelter in North America, and it was the very first organization in the US led by trans women of color. Unfortunately, Johnson's life was cut short in 1992 when her body was found in the Hudson River. Her death was ruled as a suicide, but the circumstances surrounding her death were not investigated, leading many activists to believe that she was murdered. In 2019, it was announced that a monument honoring Johnson and Rivera is going to be built in New York City, just blocks away from Stonewall Inn. So this monument will be the first permanent public piece of artwork in the world recognizing transgender women. So I also want to give a shout out to Sylvia Rivera. Sylvia Rivera was a Latina trans woman who was a lifelong trans activist in New York City. Rivera was raised by her grandmother, who beat her for her feminine expression. By age 11, she ran away from home and became a sex worker near Times Square. She was taken in by a group of drag queens and began identifying as a drag queen herself. Rivera was 17 years old when she helped lead the Stonewall riots. She claims to have thrown the second Molotov cocktail in protest of the police raiding at the Stonewall Inn. And a few weeks later, Rivera co-founded the Gay Liberation Front, a collection of gay liberation groups that fought against homophobia, capitalism, militarism, racism, and sexism. 1 year later, in 1970, she co-founded STAR, a shelter for homeless transgender youth with activist Marsha P. Johnson. Sylvia Rivera had a problem with the fact that the gay liberation movement was catered towards liberating gay and lesbian white middle class people. So she advocated for the movement to be more inclusive of marginalized groups within the LGBTQ plus community, including people of color, including transgender people, poor or homeless people, and incarcerated people. So at a gay pride rally in 1973, she forced her way onto the stage and expressed her passion for including trans and other marginalized people in the gay rights movement. This became known as her "Y'all better quiet down" speech. And despite the importance of her message, she was booed by the crowd while she spoke. After working so hard for the LGBTQ plus movement and being repeatedly betrayed, she stepped away from activism for 20 years. In 2002, Sylvia Rivera died from liver cancer at 51 years old, and a monument will be built in New York City honoring the important work that she and Marsha P. Johnson did for the trans community. Sylvia Rivera's legacy also lives on through continued efforts for intersectional inclusion within the LGBTQ plus community. I got two more individuals, and then I'll wrap it up and introduce my panelists. But we also have Miss Major Griffin Gracie. Miss Major Griffin Gracie is a Black trans woman who also helped lead and shape the trans right movement in the US. Miss Major grew up on the south side of Chicago in the 1940s and 50s, but moved to New York City in the early 1960s after facing discrimination and threats of violence for her trans identity. Miss Major was homeless for several periods of time and used sex work and theft in order to make money. Like Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera, Miss Major frequented the Stonewall Inn and took part in the Stonewall riots. On the first night of rioting, a police officer broke her jaw and knocked her unconscious before taking her into custody. After being incarcerated for 5 years in the late 1970s, Miss Major moved to California to continue her work as an activist. She worked for a nonprofit in the 1980s and 90s addressing the AIDS epidemic and also advocated for prison abolition. In 2005, she began working for the Transgender, Gender Variant, and Intersex Justice Project, TGIJP, becoming the executive director. At TGIJP, she advocated for incarcerated transgender women of color who has suffered from police brutality, poverty, racism, and gender discrimination. In 2015, Miss Major moved to Little Rock, Arkansas, where she continues to advocate for the transgender community. In Little Rock, she founded the House of Gigi, the Griffin Gracie Educational Retreat and Historical Center, a retreat house for the transgender community with programming on survival skills, healing, advocacy, community organizing, and much, much more. And also, my last individual that I want to give a special shout out, Stormy DeLavier. Stormy DeLavier was a butch lesbian and activist born in Louisiana in 1920. She had a Black mother and a white father. Her mother was her father's servant in her home. So growing up biracial in the South was very challenging at the time. So DeLavier moved to Chicago at 18 and came out as lesbian. She co-founded the Jewel Box Review, North America's first racially integrated drag touring company, where she worked for 14 years. DeLavier sang in the shows as the only drag king, always wearing a white tuxedo. Stormy DeLavier was at the Stonewall Inn the night that the riots began and is said to have started the uprising. When the police were raiding the Stonewall Inn, an officer shoved DeLavier. She punched him in the face, which resulted in 4 officers attacking and handcuffing her. When one of the officers hit her in the head with his baton, the rioting began. Because DeLavier's instrumental role in igniting the Stonewall riots, she has been called the Rosa Parks of the gay community. Her activism continued for the next 30 plus years, working as a bouncer at New York City lesbian bars and volunteering as a street patrol guardian of lesbians. She was legally armed and protected lesbians and lesbian spaces at all costs, continuing this work into her 80s. In 2014, DeLavier passed away at 93 years old, and Stormy DeLavier is one of the 50 LGBTQ plus leaders recognized on the National LGBTQ plus Wall of Honor at the site of the Stonewall Inn. So in recent months, the Supreme Court ruled that LGBTQ plus people are protected against job discrimination based on their sexual orientation or transgender status. However, we have a long way to go before we achieve true equality for LGBTQ plus people. But this is a huge victory. So we have these leaders listed above, along with many more. I wish I could say all of them, every single one, but to thank for wins like these, but especially trans women of color who were the backbone of the LGBTQ plus movement. And without their activism, places like the Brave Space Alliance, the first Black and trans-led LGBTQ plus center in Chicago, might not exist. So next time that you celebrate Pride Month by going to a Pride parade with your friends, your family, or wearing a rainbow t-shirt, remember the historical context behind the movement. And don't forget that the festive parades that you attend now started as angry protest. So celebrate how far we've come, but don't forget the sacrifices that our LGBTQ plus ancestors have made for us to be here. So thank you all, wonderful panelists. And I would like to start off by introducing Miss Katrina Stewart, and she is the executive director of the Pride Community Center here locally located in the Brazos Valley in Bryan, Texas. So Miss Katrina Dawn Stewart is a volunteer executive director of Pride Community Center, and Katrina has been engaged in LGBTQ plus education, advocacy, and leadership since 2003. Also a member of Aggie Allies, Katrina has served on local, state, and national board of directors, including Equality Texas and Transgender Education Network of Texas. She also served as executive director of Transgender Education Network of Texas from 2013 to 2015. In addition, she has presented classes in working with transgender clients for multiple state and national conferences, including the TASA and TVSA state conferences and the National Sexual Assault Conferences in 2017. We are honored to have Katrina as part of our team of educators of our new advocate and hotline volunteers every quarter, and welcome her perspective to the panel this evening. So thank you so much, Ms. Katrina, and any other additional feedback or anything else that you wanted to share?
Sure. I guess I want to comment on exactly what you were talking about. The debt that we owe our queer people of color is immense. The How prolific they were, doing so much with such little resources is sheerly amazing. A lot of us in the advocacy world today, we have established organizations that get sometimes decent funding, things like that. Totally different level than working the streets and on a shoestring budget, putting together shelters for youth. What our foremothers and forefathers, four family members, if you would, have done is just sheerly amazing, and it behooves us to keep that tradition alive.
Thank you so much, Katie. Yes, yes. Everything that Katie said, I completely agree and second that. Yes, thank you so much. And on to our next special panelist as well, Martin Rosales. So Martin Rosales is a technology coordinator for education abroad at Texas A&M University. And Martin Rosales is an international higher education professional that champions the voices of others that are often not heard through targeted specific presentations and trainings. Martin holds a master's degree in education, focusing on higher education administration, teaching English as a second language or a foreign language, and adult education and curriculum development. He currently serves as a technology coordinator for Texas A&M University for the Education Abroad office, supporting the department in creating meaningful digital content with a focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Prior to working in education abroad, he served also as an immigration advisor for students studying in the United States on J1 and F1 visas. So Martin, thank you so much for being part of this panel. Is there anything that you would like to add on as well?
I just wanted to thank you for the mentioning of those important individuals, and for lack of a better term, a history lesson. A lot of us, as I like to call us, baby queers or younger queers, don't really know much of that history, especially when we've grown up in southern states or other states that don't necessarily celebrate that type of history. So I really appreciate you recapping that for not only our benefit, but for the benefit of the viewers. So I really appreciate that.
Yes, and I do have a little bit more on Martin, actually. So in the 2 years he has been with Texas A&M University, Martin has served as a first-year experienced instructor, LGBTQ plus Pride Center mentor, and represents education abroad in the Interpersonal Violence Prevention Working Group, which brings together campus and community partners to better education students and staff on power-based and dating violence. He has also presented at regional and national conferences on the topics of support, mental health, and intercultural competency in actively supporting diverse student populations domestically and abroad. One of his aspirations is to create collective understanding of often marginalized or forgotten populations and provide an additional lens by which to inform practice. He hopes to continue lifting the voices of others, educating students and staff on intercultural competency and guiding others towards becoming global citizens with a clear pathway to success. So thank you so much, Martin, for being a part of this panel. So last but not least, Miss E.J. Smith. Thank you so much. So Miss E.J. Smith is a clinical manager and licensed professional counselor at the Capitol Hill Consortium for Counseling and Consultation. We are honored and privileged to have you alongside with us. So Miss E.J. Smith is a licensed professional counselor. She's licensed in Texas, Virginia, Maryland, and in DC. Oh, everywhere. Hey, all over, all across the board. But in addition to working as a victim advocate at the local and federal levels, she is a certified clinical trauma professional and transgender care therapist. EJ started her counseling career in 2013 in the Brazos Valley at the Sexual Assault Resource Center. Whoops, shout out, special shout out. So she's a fellow SARC supporter as well as advocate, and she used to work here. So yes, that's awesome. Currently, she is a clinical manager and counselor for a large private practice in Arlington, Virginia. She has spent much of her professional career advocating for the mental health needs of survivors of sexual assault and the LGBT community. EJ is a current member of Modern Military Association of America's, MMAA, the Military Advisory Council, and also serves as an SME on the Planning Committee for the Intimate Partner Violence Assistance Program, also known as IPVAP, as part of the Veterans Benefit and Healthcare Improvement Act of 2020. She has also previously served on advisory boards for the Military Family Advisory Network, MFAN, and Pride Community Center of the Brazos Valley, PCC. EJ is a graduate of Walden University with a master's in mental health counseling, and also she is a proud member of the alumni of University of Scranton with a Bachelor's of Arts as well as a Master's in Philosophy and Education. So thank you so much, EJ Smith, for joining us. Is there any other comments, anything else that you would like to add?
Oh, well, I am just so honored. I have to say it was such a special privilege and treat to kind of have a homecoming of sorts. You know, all the things that you read off started in Brown and College Station, you know, so y'all got me at patient zero, and I have grown since then. And so I've carried the legacy and the lessons that I learned at SARC through my entire career. So I would not be where I am today without SARC for a wide variety of reasons. So I'm just so honored and so blessed. Thank you.
Yes, thank every single one of you. Thank y'all so much. And let's go ahead and get started with these questions. So the first question that I would like to tell you all, what are some of the unique barriers to finding help or seeking help that LGBTQ+ survivors and or victims may face? For example, homophobia, transphobia, discrimination, and racism for Black, Indigenous, people of color, or refusal of medical care, discrimination, violence from law enforcement, etc. So whoever would like to start off.
So I think the biggest one is fear. We have so many negative stories. And for me, this is something Sexual Assault Resource Center has struggled with for the longest time. And it's not any fault of SARC. It is our community tells stories to each other, and they're true stories, but they are often the bad ones, right? How people are mistreated by doctors, by law enforcement, by whoever. And it creates a barrier to those individuals when they experience something traumatic coming to SARC, and even reporting stuff to law enforcement, so that they really live with that trauma and don't really get it treated. So I would say that that is one of the biggest factors. In Bryan College Station, I would add the factor of community size. Um, the LGBTQ plus community is pretty small, and so there's always the risk of when you share something that has happened, you may be, um, including a former partner or someone you know very well, and it may impact their lives as well. And a lot of times we don't want to do that. And because we're so close, it creates a ripple effect that is very concerning for some people. What I will say is that Sexual Assault Resource Center is a very welcoming place. Um, I've been working, as you said, with SARC for a few years now, and it is one of the most welcome places I've been. But we we need to find ways to encourage more people of color and more LGBT people uh, to um, to come to SARC and get what they need.
Katie, I absolutely agree with you. And so much of what you said, I think that, we deal with phobias, we deal with blatant discrimination. We also deal with kind of some of those unchallenged beliefs that maybe don't come to the forefront until somebody is telling us something that happened to them. And all of a sudden, things like purity culture are popping up as well. So you have to remember that, like, LGBT survivors or LGBTQ survivors of sexual violence deal with all of the same stuff that all of our cisgender and heterosexual survivors of sexual violence deal with, on top of things like minority stress. When is the last time that you walked into a room and had to say, an introduction to yourself and went, "Ooh, are these people going to like me if I tell them that I have a wife instead of a husband?" Right? Or something like that. Even just these little tiny grating things that just make it so much more difficult to cross the barrier into a place like SARC and get your needs met. I think there's also sometimes a well-intended over fixation on gender and sex. So an LGBTQ identity absolutely plays a role in how a survivor experiences their sexual trauma as well as their healing from that trauma. However, not every piece of that survivor's experience has to be seen through the lens of sexual orientation, sexual identity, gender identity. If somebody tells you that they don't believe that this has anything to do with the fact that they identify as whatever they identify with, the same way that we tell people to believe survivors when they disclose their assault, believe somebody when they say, "No, I actually don't think that that's the issue." Right? And sometimes we pivot too hard into a diversity mindset. So
I really like the direction that EJ went because it actually works really well with the international student side of things. And so, we look at the changing landscape of international students. So in the past, it was mostly graduate students, but now starting to pivot more towards undergraduate students. And as of today, there's over 1 million of them here in the United States. But most of these students are coming from Asian cultures. There's that culture of silence. There's that collectivism versus individualism. And they're already confused about their own identity, trying to navigate this new culture here within the United States. And they have this disconnect from their home country. So they have this isolation double barrier. So they are the LGBTQ plus individual in the group of international friends. But with the LGBTQ plus friends, they're the international one. And so they're trying to navigate these separate identities. And so they not only have that kind of lack of cultural context, they also have the lack of what justice really means. Or um, what Katie was saying earlier, the LGBTQ community here is very small. Well, international student communities and college campuses are also very small and very interconnected. And so if they were to talk to their peers, who's to say that they're not connected to a family member back home? or there's not that connection through social media, the prevalence of social media, and then they're outed. And depending on the country that they're coming from, it's illegal to be homosexual or to be bisexual or lesbian, queer, trans. And in some places, it's punishable by death. So, depending on their circumstance, they have fear of deportation, fear of being isolated or persecuted. And another piece that we're kind of talking about, but we're kind of skirting the issue, is the issue of racism that may be prevalent in these circles, because we, unfortunately, especially in higher education spaces, focus too much on the white male or white female 1824 experience, and we're not building programming or building resources that are central and designed to LGBT students of color or indigenous people. And so, just kind of piling all of that on top of it, you have the normal stressors that come with being a survivor. Then you have the additional stressors of being an LGBTQ plus individual, and then find a final layer of the intersectionality of one's identity and fear, not only in the United States but also in their home country.
Yes, Martin, thank you so much. Katie, EJ, yes. And Martin, that kind of leads me to my next question. So perfect leeway. So what forms of abuse are unique to LGBTQ plus survivors, whether it's transgender individuals, intersex individuals, asexual individuals, pansexual, maybe possibly outings, one sexuality, and et cetera.
So, there's so much similarity. There are differences, but there's so much similarity as well as with the rest of the population. Um, I think outing is a big one. Another big one is um, the term is escaping me right now. So, EJ, if you remember it, please speak up. But it is basically someone is sexually assaulted to make them change their gender, or corrective rape. That's what I'm thinking of. Change their gender or convince them that they are really not a lesbian, they really like guys. Um, I know that sounds like a crazy idea when we're in our calm minds, but it happens. Um, I think that's one thing that's particular to our community. Um, but as EJ brought up earlier, as well as Martin, it's a layering effect, right? It's it's what everyone else is dealing with, and then it's the stigma on top of that. Uh, and one thing I would build off of also with what Martin said is our structures today are so often, we don't have you mentioned programming for queer people of color. Um, but the problem is that our infrastructure is built by white people. And that's not a bad thing, but it means that we do not have the perspective or the access that Marsha P. Johnson had, that others had, that were on the ground and building from the ground up. And it's what makes the work of reaching those communities sometimes hard, because not only does it put blinders on us, but there's a real access issue there that we need to get past.
Sorry, I was trying to find my mute button. I really like what Katie brought to this conversation, because I actually had in my notes for the first question. I was like, I'm gonna skip it, and I was gonna save it for later. But I mean, while we are very diverse in our experience as a panel, most of us are white presenting, and so a lot of the resources that are available are created by white presenting individuals. You have white presenting individuals who are going to be your counselors. Most counselors are going to be women. This is kind of the way it is. The same in higher education. Most advisors are women. More recently, more gay men are getting into the field, but it's mostly women. But when we look at unique forms of abuse, so there's an increased risk for international students and we can even say this for first generation students. We can say this for students who are out of state students going from one side of the United States to the other, but due to this perceived vulnerability of with inexperience with the culture, the local culture, the United States culture. But one thing that's really troubling is the international student population could lose their visa due to drug or alcohol abuse. You know, we have, unfortunately, substances that are used in some of these attacks on these individuals. And if a police officer were to get involved and this person gets tested and they are under the influence of a substance, that could be something that denies them a renewal or their visa. Um, Depending on who the perpetrator is, it could be someone within their own community. And so then how do they navigate that piece of it? And then when we look at our graduate students, a lot of their ability to stay here is is the relationships that they have with faculty members, the relationships that they have with their lab partners. And so they want to try to keep that as much as possible, because if they lose that, then they lose their visa. They can no longer be a student. Um, and then there's this, I know I'm getting a little off topic, but there's also the psychological abuse that they could suffer, because if, again, I'm looking at this at a college context, but the immediate response is, let's take them out of classes. Let's let them drop classes. They need to focus on their mental health. Let's get them out. Well, international students can't do that. If they drop below a full-time load, they're now out of status. They get terminated. They have 15 days to leave the United States. They could face deportation hearings. And so it's not only the kind of like the abuse of power that people have over them, but it's also this, a lot of the ways that we could address those are not necessarily available to them.
I would definitely agree with some of that interlayering of issues, Martin. So thank you so much for bringing that up, because I'm gonna kind of bounce off of what you said as a foundation and say, I'm privileged enough to be in confidential therapeutic relationships with people of all sorts of backgrounds, including folks who are international. DC is extremely diverse in just about every demographic and population that you can think of. It is, it's really amazing to live in a place that you must have things in multiple languages. You must have things for a wide variety of individuals, because they're all here. And, in terms of abuse, I want to talk a little bit about some of the specific abuses that I've heard survivors, specifically from the LGBTQ community, talk about that occurred at the hands of therapists and advocates. And those things look like, there is a very problematic and pervasive belief that sexual assault somehow has somebody choose their gender identity, has somebody choose who they are attracted to, right, romantically or sexually. And that belief, I think a lot of people are savvy, manipulative, I don't know, you can decide what you want to call it, to not say that in public, but they will say it behind closed doors. And it comes out in direct ways and also in indirect ways. If you think that somebody's abuse caused them to love one group of people over another, that is a problem, and that is abusive, especially because therapists hold a position of privilege, power, and trust, right? So that is one that I think that more people need to be talking about. The other pieces that I've heard are, the discrimination. We see that a lot in domestic violence shelters and whatnot, that well, you must be a certain identity of person in order for us to receive you into our shelter. The other one is fetishizing. There are so many individual sexual orientations and identities that are immediately discounted and fetishized, both by the mainstream majority culture and also within the LGBT community. We are not without our own areas of growth, right? And so those are a couple of the things that I see as very specific and problematic abuses. So
EJ, if I may jump off of that, I am so glad you brought up the, you know, I'm going to just say it plain because that's all the only way I know how to say it. Being raped turns you gay, or being raped turns you transgender. Um, I think both you and I have heard it in conferences, and it has prompted both of us to make it part of the education we do. Um, and I so much agree with you. It is one of the things that, as I have presented, like you have in these spaces, that has just horrified me. Because if you break it down, the people that are saying it, that are providing victim services, should know better. But again, it is stereotype and the sort of thing that you are talking about. We put these people in boxes and assume certain things about them, and don't really question our own beliefs. So thank you so much for bringing that up, because you know how passionate I am about that. Thank you.
Thank y'all so much. Oh, that was wonderful information. So my third question is, in a perfect world with a perfect agency, the goal is to provide efficient and effective all around survivor centered and focused care to all survivors of sexual assault, especially those marginalized and disenfranchised groups, such as the LGBTQ plus community. However, many barriers and service gaps do occur more often than not. And I know you guys kind of talked a little bit about that, but do you all face any of these challenges as a service provider or as an educator, and even as an individual? And how do you overcome them?
I'll go first as I start cracking my knuckles. So EJ brought up a really good point in being in the DC area versus somewhere like the Brazos Valley. And so one way to overcome the issues of accessibility is to ensure that we have not only resources that are in their mother tongue, but also like peer-to-peer advocacy, people from their age group, from their background, from their countries that speak their language, and to be able to help them navigate these issues. Another important thing that we can do, and we're doing it right now, is collaborating with community partners and having these types of conversations. Um, we could be involving student organizations, local groups, or culturally specific resources, because a lot of the times I think we as service individuals try to take on too much of that burden. And it's like, well, we have to do everything, and we think very specific and insular in that sense, because we see a problem, we're trying to fix it. And we have to remember that we have wonderful individuals like the panelists like you, Patricia, that we can join forces and overcome that. Um, Also, in a perfect world, and again, I unfortunately have to hearken to the international student population, and in some cases, the undocumented population is this ward of the state issue, or become a ward of public services, because that is a barrier for them, that they don't they can't necessarily navigate those channels, because they're like, well, is this something, in my visa interview, they asked me this question, or I know that I've heard from my abuelita that I can't go and get something from this place because they're waiting for me there. Um, and then another small, well, not really small barrier, but a large barrier, especially for students in general, but specifically for international students, is a lot of the services for mental health counseling, for victim advocacy that are available to them, excuse me, survivor advocacy that are available to them on campus, cease when they're no longer students. We've actually had situations where students were on the brink, needed assistance, and couldn't get it because they weren't students. they weren't registered. They didn't have the ability to get those services at that moment in time, and we had to reach out to the community and get them those services. Um, but except for those extreme circumstances, once they leave, they don't have the same amount of services that they would have here. And for better or for worse, COVID taught us that we can function in these virtual spaces. So in a perfect world, virtual counseling that is available to anyone, anywhere, at any time, because a lot of the structures that we have in place don't necessarily meet them where they're at, especially when we're looking at areas where people have been confined to their homes and possibly with their abusers in these situations. And without, Sark and other individuals having these 24/7 hotlines or having the ability for virtual counseling, they wouldn't get the services that they would need. So we need more people to be doing that.
So, as you ask that question, I have to be honest. The part of me that is studying organizational leadership kicked in and started thinking performance metrics, and this little war started going off in my head, because so we talk about the perfect service organization, right? And then if we're going to be all business like and all efficient, we're going to talk about performance metrics. But when dealing with these sort of things, with human squashy issues, you cannot have performance metrics. You cannot set a quota of how many people you're going to see in a day. I know that that's what is imposed on so many therapists and so many organizations, but you have to build a relationship with a client. You have to build a relationship with the community. That takes time, and that is not easily measured, if at all. And the trend with organizations is towards going more that sort of direction, more business oriented and stuff like that. And there's a tension there. There's pros and cons, but I think for this kind of work, that's one of the cons, is that the kind of work that needs to be done is slow, and requires a lot of back and forth and a lot of participation. My 2 cents.
Yeah, Katie, I absolutely agree with you that as somebody who went from the nonprofit sector into, private business, and have seen kind of from the management role, as far as like, hey, we want to take care of a lot of people. We also need to keep our doors open so we can continue to take care of a lot of people, right? And there is kind of that balance. And, I think that this is where, I'll be honest with you, I live in an area, and our office is in an area where most of the providers in our zip code do not take insurance. They don't. It is cash pay to the tune of $250 a session. It is Arlington. It is expensive. Okay. Now, that being said, the organization that I work for, we take all insurance, right? Everything, all the major ones. And the reason that we made that commitment is because that's part of our value, right? And so I think it's about knowing, who are you and what commitment have you made to show up in the world in this space? All right. And, our practice owner, who has definitely become one of my mentors over the years, is laser focused on who we are. She knows who we are. And I think that's why we can kind of operate in this kind of unique area, because they're like, oh my gosh, you take insurance, it's like, yes, I do. I'm sorry. I didn't grow up in a place where we're charging that, many hundreds of dollars, multiple hundreds of dollars for one session. I mean, I think I'm good, but like, so I don't know if I'm $300 an hour good. So, so that's something about like really knowing who you are. But then also, I just want to encourage people to not be complicit. When you hit a certain baseline of, we are welcoming, we are affirming, that is wonderful. Affirming is like the bottom of the barrel baseline. right? I am glad that you aren't going to actively hate on some of my most vulnerable clients. That is wonderful. That does not mean you are competent to treat them, right? And if we are going to say that a cisgender white person, heterosexual person, is entitled to not only not being hated for who they happen to be when they walk through the door, but they're also entitled to receive excellent services once they get there, well, then we need to have the same standard for every single person who comes in the door. And on top of that, when we get into things like purity culture, right? When you had mentioned sex work in the beginning, that was so important because that's one of the sticking points, right? Where you say, well, this person was sexually assaulted. Okay, well, they were a sex worker. Well, they were still sexually assaulted. That is actually the problem, right? So, it really is, again, about knowing, I think, who you are, who your agency is, and committing to that. The other one, in the perfect world, I don't really see any resources for neurodiverse sexual assault survivors, who, by the way, make up a significant portion of not only our trans communities, but also our asexual and aromantic communities. And we are not serving our people if we're not serving that population. So those are some of the issues that I've seen. And I think that, starting values first and getting real clear about who you are and what you stand for is actually the way to overcome all of those other things. Thank you.
I just wanted to snap for EJ, talking about neurodiversity. Again, I'm sorry, harping, international student lens. Most students are from China. Those students do not get diagnosed with any of the mental issues that they may actually be dealing with. A lot of the times they're sent here as a way to fix them or to deal with it. And so, as we know, mental health becomes very important between the ages of 18 and 30 and 18 and 30. And specifically, a lot of these present by the time they're 25. And so I am very, very glad that you brought that up because I don't think we talk about it enough.
Wow, thank you so much, Martin, EJ, Katie. That was amazing information. So that leads me to my next question. In terms of resources, do each of you feel that there is a lack of resources or an abundance of, and why? What has to be done in order to ensure and or improve on these LGBTQ plus survivors' issues and needs? For example, mostly likely the assault is underreported or not reported at all. There's language barriers. There's a lack of culturally competent service providers and resources, and et cetera. And I did want to add one thing. Being a bilingual education and outreach specialist, and coming to SARC, it's an awesome, great place. But I did see, there was a lack of culturally competent providers and services. Survivors want to see people who look like them, people who speak the same language that they do, people who can possibly relate to some of the same experiences that they've experienced. And I know personally firsthand, being a proud daughter of immigrants, being a proud woman of color, proud Latina, being a proud gay woman at that, all these issues and barriers, we need to do better. We need to do better. And yesterday, I'm proud to announce that, I facilitated alongside our bilingual counselor, our very first Spanish support group. But, SARC has been here longer than I've been alive. And we're just now, having a Spanish support group. And we live in an area where it's a huge Spanish speaking population. So we have to do better. And I know we are in the process of creating an plus support group. And eventually I would love to create and incorporate the intersectionality of LGBTQ plus and people of color. So yeah, and I'm also working on in the process of starting a diversity, inclusion, and equity committee. So yeah, just things like that we need to improve on, we need to do better, and we are agents of change. So it starts with us as individuals. That way we can go out there and educate, and obviously educate them and let them know, but people also have to comprehend and understand and be open-minded to these resources, and being aware of this education piece, this prevention piece, and in being aware of these resources that we provide. So yeah, go ahead, anybody.
You embody the spirit of Sylvia and Marcia so damn well. You really do. Um, you know, so speaking about the Brazos County, Bryan College Station is one of the top 20 metroplexes, according to Wikipedia, in Texas. Our resources are woefully inadequate. We are nothing like an Austin or a Dallas or a Houston, not even probably a tenth of that. And part of that is the transient nature of so much of our community, unfortunately. And what we need is people who will do the hard day-to-day work, building resources, just exactly what you're talking about. And it requires people, it requires money, unfortunately. And I would like to see us do more of exactly what you are describing, finding out how to do it in a desert, basically.
EJ, you first.
Oh, thank you. As you were talking about those groups, I am just like, oh my gosh, those are so amazing. They are so wonderful, and they are so, so needed. So I'm sure that they will be filled, and that you'll have probably lists of folks to kind of rotate in for a long time. As you were talking about some of these, the bilingual elements that are coming into SARC, and I was thinking back on like, wow, y'all are just heads and shoulders of where we were when I was there between 2013 and 2016. And I remember Katie and I working on, Katie, I don't know if you remember this, when we overhauled every form that SARC had to get rid of the M and F on all of our forms. And that was, and it was really just about shifting a lens, it was like, well, what are we going to put there? We're going to put a blank line, right? We're going to put a blank line. And when we talk about the gaps and, what has to be done, I think it's really important that as, experts in the field and advocates and really passionate individuals, they may know like the technical, the subject matter expertise, right? But it's never going to be a substitute for lived experience. Yes, I am a queer woman, but I moved through the world with such straight privilege that it is, it throws people off all the time. And so that means like, yeah, I can comment on my experience, but I am not the Rosetta Stone for the queer experience, And so it was really important when we're putting together trainings and even resources, when Katie and I partnered together, she brings a completely different perspective, right? And if I was going to go back and do it again, I probably would have looked at how are we inviting people to express all of their different identities, and why check boxes? Well, some of the reason was because we had a database from the state that we had to input, but there's a way to communicate that in a way that says, hey, this is a technicality, we can't change this, but we also want to capture the heart of you and understand that this is the database that we have to work with. I'm sorry, and I think most people are so reasonable. They understand that you didn't code the database, but what are you doing to acknowledge that that is a friction point, that that could be a pain point. I also think that we really need to work with our forensic nurses and those professionals at the hospital to get rid of the binary when it comes to forensic sexual assault exams. That those are, unless they've changed, as far as I know, there is one for males and one for females, and it even says that on the paper, so you can't even say, this is for people who have this anatomy and this is for people who have this anatomy, and by the way, that would be inadequate too. But the medical, I think, is a big pain point. And so when we're doing this advocacy work, the experience that somebody has at the hospital, the experience that somebody has in law enforcement is a mental health issue, right? Is a community outreach and education issue, because those are some of the more powerful experiences, and we really need to partner and advocate at, I don't care how big of a level you need to get it to, federal even, to get those kits changed. But that one's overdue. I think that one is way overdue, because that was a problem when Katie and I were doing forms last time. So, but y'all are doing amazing. I am so, so proud of what you have done and continue to do.
I think EJ brings up a really important point about not only seeing areas of structural change, but also trying to change the structure, right? And how we need to advocate not only in our local communities, not only in our regional communities or our state communities, but all the way to the top through the federal level. Luckily, we have a new administration where that might be a little bit better to do than in previous years for reasons. I think we're all aware of those reasons. But I think it's really important that we need to walk that line very carefully. So I am a Latino. I look white. I don't have to worry about spaces that I go into until I open my mouth, because then they're like, oh, man, woman, who knows? I get called ma'am every day. But we need to be careful with our expectations and what we are trying to do to assist others, and not to take their power away from them. Because a lot of the times we try to pivot and use that assumed privilege to help, and sometimes we help to the point of hurting, and so we just have to be really careful when we walk that line. um, I would say that you all are definitely lacking in funding. That was brought up. This is not something that is well funded, if funded at all. um, EJ brought this up earlier, not only just the resources for places like SARC, but medical resources. We have a medical system that likes to disenfranchise poor people and keep them sick and unhealthy. If you're not working, or you work in a job that isn't deemed as part of the normal societal structure, you're not going to have insurance, and you're not going to be able to seek some of the help that you need. I think the last one that I had written down was tools for expectation management for individuals coming in and coping with unfamiliar territory or cultural norms, because um, I'm blessed that I was born in San Francisco. I lived in Miami. I grew up in Deep South Texas. I've been to Ohio. I've been to Japan. I've been to all these different places, so I can kind of navigate different cultures, but not everybody is like that. And as Katie brought up, we're kind of a large metroplex in Texas for one reason or another, with a large transient population. And so being cognizant of, maybe they're coming from a Dallas and now they're here and they're like, oh my God, what is this? Or they're coming from a ranch into College Station, like, wow, this is crazy. And so it's just kind of, navigating those different perspectives.
So if I may bring something up, so yesterday I was honored to speak to law enforcement about LGBT issues. It was organized by Texas A&M, and the officers brought up something that I'd like to bring up, and that is, so many times when we talk about sexual assault, when we talk about domestic violence, we have our definitions, and then there's the legal definitions. And SARC advocates know this very well, because we go through a training in which the DA tells us these are the legalistic things we can do that may not match how you're identifying it. but we don't do a good job of talking about that publicly, right? Or making it transparent when someone walks in the door. And by that, I don't mean to say, oh, we can't serve you, but we can serve you, but here are some reality checks and what we can do, and we will work with you beyond that, but you need to know this going in. And I think that the fact that that officer brought that up wasn't astounding to me, but it really hit home our difference in language and what we set for our clients.
You know, Katie, I used to do that outreach too, with law enforcement as I think one of the hats to make sure that we had our grant funding, right? So I could continue to do my job. So I can't think of anybody better to take over and be doing that space, because I think that, and not to make it sound like it was mine or anything like that, but I've been there and I've had officers ask those questions for sure. And, you know, the definition that I used to use when somebody would say, well, does this count? Right? Because, well, count to whom? You know, and so my definition as an advocate and as a mental health professional is something was taken from you that wasn't freely given, according to you. Right? And that was the broadest, you know, space that I could occupy to say, like, if you come in, you know, I'm not asking you to prove it. You know, there's so many different barriers. When we were talking with law enforcement, that was a problem for them, because they're like, you are setting people up to think that we're going to be able to do something that we're not going to be able to do. And I said, well, that's a problem for multiple reasons. Right. But also, you know, can we flip that around and say, hey, listen, you're going to have your hands tied with certain cases because evidence is just ridiculous to gather. And, you know, I'm going to say it, people still don't believe adult survivors of sexual assault, right? There's still so much victim blaming. There's so much, you know, if you're not the perfect victim, to the extent that, you know, I've even had campaigns where we showed what somebody was wearing when they were sexually assaulted. We had survivors donate what were they wearing, and it was things like pajamas. It was things like ratty sweatpants, you know, and a t-shirt. It was, and you know what, right up to maybe there was a cocktail dress involved too. So what, right? That being said, what we used to do, the conversation I used to have with those officers was to say, if you find that your hands are tied, instead of saying to that person, well, that doesn't count, send them to us, send them to me, send them to our advocates. Guess where they're going to get the validation and the support that they need. Don't put, if you're telling me that you can't do that because of your role, okay, I don't know your job well enough to tell you whether or not that's true. Send them to me. I'm telling you, our threshold, our definition, we can create that service relationship for that person. And so I'm really glad to hear that the conversation is ongoing. But I'll be honest with y'all, that conversation, SARC gets a lot of things right. I could not believe, I kind of came to Texas with this attitude of, well, if it exists in Texas, it must exist everywhere else. Like, sorry, I grew up in Jersey. And what I have actually found is, guess what? Y'all get some things right that the rest of the country doesn't get right. You know, when I got to North Carolina and I found out that there was not a Victims of Crimes Bill of Rights, I couldn't believe it. The one that now exists at the federal level was written and came out of Houston, Texas. I could not, I was like, well, amen, we got this one right. So, you know, right? So, you know, just because there's areas of improvement, please don't make the same mistake. I hope that anybody watching does not make the same mistake that I did, being a snobby Northeastern person, and think that just because Texas had it, that must mean it is just like standard operating procedure literally everywhere else. And that is not necessarily true. So y'all are doing amazing work.
I think you all are amazing individuals and souls, and you are also doing such an important part of history in society and changing people's views, and advocating for these survivors, especially these LGBTQ plus survivors, and telling them they are not alone. We believe you, we see you, we hear you, and there's still so much work that needs to be done, but you guys are here for a reason, and I want to thank each and every one of you, because you guys, I wish I had you all when I was younger, but that's the reason why I do what I do, because I want to be the person that I needed when I was younger. And I want to be an advocate for people who couldn't advocate for themselves. So from your expertise and your experience, this brings me to my last and final question of the night of the panel. What are some suggestions and or recommendations that you would like to see implemented now and in the future that will help with education and comprehension surrounding the LGBTQ plus community, and ways to help at a community level as well as an individual level?
Oh boy. Well, I think this might come off a little crass, but I think we really need to get, like, as a community, we need to kind of get over ourselves, and we need to have those tough conversations. Um, like, just listening to the news now and this whole thing about critical race theory and teaching it in schools, and I'm just sitting there going, you don't even know what that is. Like, you can't teach that in elementary school. That's not what that is. But this whole, like, for lack of a better way to describe it, fear of the unknown, because maybe it takes us off our pedestal of power, right? Wake up, white people. Sorry. And I know this might sound really like, "Rah," but it's just like, I'm tired of it. I am so tired of it. I'm tired of being the 0.1% in the community. I'm tired of seeing one faculty member in a sea of 2,000 that might be close to who I identify as an individual. So, backing off a little bit of my rage, we need to make sure that we have a basic understanding of who people are as individuals. And we need to, I know that labels can be helpful in a restrictive language, but we need to understand that not everyone's going to fit our preconceived notions of what it means to be a person of a specific type. And so we need better educational resources in areas where maybe they don't necessarily want them, um, to put it politely. And I am very glad that the administration has changed, because I really think diversity training is important. And above and beyond the 20 minutes, like, this is what diversity means, and you check the box and you're done. Like, this is a continuous thing. Like, I am still being trained in diversity and equity issues, and we're never going to stop learning. Um, and I think we really need to be more intentional in our anti-discriminatory language and policy, and how we educate others on that, because without that intentional language, we kind of skirt around the actual issues. So
Oh, I love what you had to say. Absolutely. Absolutely. No, I think it's so true. And when I think about, when I was reflecting on this question, I was thinking about kind of some of the things that we talked about already. With it's so important for people to see folks who look like them, especially in advocate spaces, right? But there was another thing that I thought of too, which is it's also important for people to see folks who don't look like them showing up in those advocate spaces. One of the fights that I fought when I was at SARC was we had our first 2 male, cisgender, heterosexual advocates. And we had difficult conversations with the hospitals. We had difficult conversations with law enforcement. We had difficult conversations internally. We just had lots of difficult conversations. And we had to take a look at what myths were we perpetuating by having that stance. I think it is really actually very important for a trans person of color to have the experience of maybe a cisgender white male showing up for them and saying, I am so sorry that this happened to you. That was wrong. And here's how we're going to help you navigate through the system and treat somebody, with human decency and respect, right? So like, just because somebody happens to be part of the majority culture doesn't mean that they don't have a role in here too. So that can be very healing. The other one is, when I was working for the Marine Corps, I worked with 99.9% cis males, as far as I knew, right? And it was really interesting to me. Guess who didn't know that they too had bodily autonomy and needed to give consent? Oh, that was a conversation, right? So here's these Marines, sitting in this classroom getting their annual sexual assault prevention training. And I said, when's the last time someone asked you for consent? And they went, what? That is so true. I have worked with cisgender males who were sexually assaulted by cis women. I have worked with trans women who were sexually assaulted by their cisgender lesbian partner, right? And here's the other thing too, is that specifically when we're talking about identities that may change and evolve over time, I always say that we're all on the journey of becoming, right? We're all trying to live our truth as best we know how. And so one of the things that we also need to look at when we're designing programs is, how do we reconcile and get comfortable using language that also may evolve over time? So when I'm working with somebody who may have experienced a trauma at a time where they identified as either a gender, a sexual orientation, or something that they no longer identify as, we have that conversation, right? We have that conversation and we say, how would you like for me to refer to you when we're talking about this? What pronouns would you like me to use when we're talking about this? And that is actually really important. The cool part is that sometimes that's an amazing piece in their healing, because there is a little bit of separation and having grown beyond, right? And as long as we don't tell people that their sexual assault is what made them who they are now, as long as we don't do that, it can be really, really healing. But I want to throw that out as well, because I know we're talking about LGBT. Male bisexuality is one of the most erased identities out there, and people are hurting. I have worked with so many male survivors of sexual assault who didn't even know that they were allowed to call what they went through abuse and rape and assault, because nobody told them that actually they get to ask for consent too, right? Or that somebody should be asking them for consent. So it's very interesting. It's very interesting.
We need better laws, which means we need better legislators, which means we need to vote for better people and not stupid people. We need more resources. SARC needs a ton more money than it gets. We need, as the Black Lives Movement has taught us so well, we need more than just law enforcement. We need, strategic on-site therapists and counselors. We really need to address mental health. We need to better understand the connectedness of just about every damn social justice issue that exists, and how our identities impact each of those too. I say this because, especially for, again, I'm just going to be plain and frank, for white LGBT people who have gone to college, who are maybe middle class, we have this idea that homelessness, joblessness, sex work, all of these things do not impact us. Well, they do indirectly, and more so, it doesn't matter. They affect our community. Immigration affects our community. All of these issues tie together, but our culture does not teach that. At least our white middle class culture does not teach that. And we really need that. I agree with EJ. We need straight cis guys in SARC as well. But I would also agree we need more people of color who are therapists and who can bring, because I think there is something to be said. I don't know the experience of a queer person of color, and I cannot speak to that. And sometimes, I can only go so far. Sometimes that's what's needed as well. So we need, it takes a village, as was once said, and it really does. But we don't ever do things that way, which is silly. But yeah, that's what I would say, especially the legislator thing. We really got to vote in better people.
Katie, I look forward to contributing to your campaign.
I'm here for it.
Thank you.
Hey, I'll vote for you, Katie. Hey. Thank you all so much. It has been a privilege and an absolute honor to have each and every one of you on my panel tonight. And I hope it will make a difference in the world. To everybody that is watching out here, feel free to share it with your friends, your family, any and everybody. I like to say, anybody willing to listen to me talk about the prevention and education of sexual assault and stuff like that. I'm so honored to be a part of this panel. So any additional comments, any feedback, any quick plugs of your respective agencies or organizations, any upcoming events or other resources? A couple of additional resources I do want to state real quickly. The National Coalition of Anti-Violence Programs, which is a coalition of programs that that documents and advocates for victims of anti-LGBT and anti-HIV/AIDS violence and harassment. And it also provides services for domestic violence, sexual assault, police misconduct, and other forms of victimization. Their site has a list of local anti-violence programs and publications, and their hotline is 212-714-1141. And I also want to give a shout out to the Trevor Project, which is a help and suicide prevention for LGBTQ+ youth. Their hotline is 866-488-7386. And another special shout out to the LGBT National Hotline. Their call center that refers to over 15,000 resources across the country that support LGBTQ+ individuals. Their hotline is 888-843-4564. And they also provide weekly LGBT chat rooms for youth. And also a special shout out to the Association for Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, and Transgender Issues in Counseling. So they have a directory of LGBT friendly mental health specialists across the US. And Forge, which stands for Ourselves, Reworking Gender Expression. And this is the home to the Transgender Sexual Violence Project, which provides services and publishes research for transgender persons experiencing violence and for their loved ones. Okay, now I'll pass the baton to whoever wants to go first.
Forge is a great resource. I love going to Forge. They always have great programs and webinars, so I highly recommend that. Pride Community Center, you can find us on Facebook. We do have a pool party this coming up weekend and a picnic. The picnic's at Sue Haswell Park. The pool party is at Bear X. So please consider stopping on by. But you mentioned such great organizations. I think the other one I would mention, in my introduction, you mentioned Transgender Education Network of Texas, and the current executive director and board are some of the most diverse and kick-ass people I have ever met. And they have taken the organization leaps and bounds beyond where it was when I was with it and before. And so I would highly recommend them as a resource as well.
I just want to do a quick shout out to RAINN, RAINN. They have very good resources for practitioners. They have partnered with organizations to provide resources for those who may be assisting international students who are survivors. And so I first encountered them at a regional conference in California, but they have some really great resources. And in case you would like their number, it's 1-800-656-HOPE, HOPE.
Okay, and so the one that I think I am aware of and have utilized is one that was actually in my bio. So the Modern Military Association of America. And they provide a wide variety of resources. I think two of the ones that I'm most familiar with and really grateful for are they have a program that, you know, for many years, Don't Ask, Don't Tell was policy, and people could be discharged from the military specifically for being LGBT. And they lost their veterans benefits, they lost their educational benefits. And so MMAA has lawyers who donate their time to restore discharge statuses so that these people can actually get the benefits that they earned through the service of their country. The other one that I would like to point out is they have a program called MilPride, and MilPride is for the families of military families who have LGBT youth in their families. And, you know, we get to not always pick where we live. And there is an overlap between the states that have some of the most aggressive anti-LGBT, anti-trans kids laws that are either proposed or actually on the books. And they also tend to have the most military bases in their states. You know, so Texas is one of them, right? There's a ton of military bases in Texas, and we watch some really aggressive legislation get posed. And so this organization, you know, if a family has orders and they say, hey, my kid is, you know, non-binary, or my child is, you know, has really great care team where we're at, where can we go? Who's been there? Who's done that? You know, which providers are safe? In some countries, as Martin brought up, it's, you know, absolutely dangerous to be LGBT. Well, those are some of the places where we also have military bases and some of those families going over there. And so MMAA is amazing. Their social media is under LGBTQ military. And so they have a really active Facebook presence and Instagram presence. So definitely would recommend those two.
EJ reminded me of one. Outright International. They work on international organization dedicated to human rights advocacy on people who experience discrimination or abuse on the basis of their actual perceived sexual orientation, gender identity, expression, etc. And they operate around the world. So they're in Latin America, Africa, Europe, Asia, Middle East, and they have some presence within the UN and regional mechanisms as well. So they're a really good resource.
Thank you all so much. Yeah, and I thank you, Martin, for shouting out RAINN. I was going to do that as well. Yeah, so thank you so much. The National, yes, Online Sexual Assault Helpline. Yeah, and also just once again, SARC is your local your local resource here in the Brazos Valley. And feel free to call our 24/7 crisis hotline at 979-731-1000, or go visit us on our website, sarcbb.org. Follow us on our social media, Instagram, Facebook, share some cool stuff, new events coming up. Yeah, that's all I got for tonight. But thank you all so much once again. Oh, a special shout out. I do want to say we are doing a Pride in honor of Pride Month, a fundraiser, a bonfire fundraiser. So we are having, shirts that say support all survivors with a rainbow logo on there. And basically the benefits and the donations will go to providing services to our survivors. So feel free to go check that out. Go buy a t-shirt, a crew neck, sweater. I'm waiting for mine. So, but yeah, thank you all so much. I sincerely appreciate you, Martin, Katie, and EJ. Thank you all so much. And y'all have a wonderful rest of your night. And to everyone viewing out there, you all are agents of change. So it starts with you. It starts with you all, and we can change the world. It's not going to happen overnight. We know this, but hey, just take it day by day, step by step. As long as we're on that path, we're gonna do good, and we need to do better. And we know that, we know that. But just having us here on this panel tonight, that's a place to start. That's a place to start. So thank you all so much once again. Do you guys have any other questions, comments, feedback? Anything else to share? Awesome. Thank you all so much, and y'all have a great night.